Um, who likes listening to debates? You guys know what a debate is? Two people argue their sides and they try to prove who's right. Okay, you can have political debates.
I like to participate.
You like to run for office?
Participate, but not to listen.
You like just to debate people? Yeah. Do they have in Israel? There's not so much the political debates where people are. I mean, they kind of are talking about their position, but it's not like in America when someone's running for president, the two men face each other and they're answering questions directly. But you have political debates, theological debates. If you've heard, enjoy some of these where you get like an atheist on one side and then there's a creationist on the other side, and they're debating who's right. Or if you get, maybe a Christian pastor versus a Jewish rabbi, and they're debating, things of the scriptures. But obviously, what's the point of the debate? It's to prove to the opposition that you're right. To convince them through facts, logic, whatever, that what you're saying is correct. And conversely, you're also saying that they're wrong. My pastor told me this joke once: when you argue with your wife, it's not just that she wants to hear that she's right, but also that you're wrong. If someone's right, someone is wrong as well. Yeah, I'm wrong a lot. So the debate is really to prove your point, but sometimes people enter these debates with more of an evil intention. And what's their goal? It's not just to prove your point, but it's to make the other person look foolish. To humiliate that person. Why? To discredit him. To make him seem like he doesn't know what he's talking about. And so if he looks like a fool, then other people also think he's a fool, and they will not want to agree with him in what he believes. And I think this latter type of debater is really describes the Sadducees in today's text. This was their goal when they spoke with Yeshua and brought this question to him. Oh yeah. This was really the goal of the Sadducees. They didn't want to just win a debate with Yeshua. They wanted to do something much more damaging to him and his cause, to make him look like a fool. And so when we start reading in verse 27, we see these Sadducees. It says, "Then came to him certain of the Sadducees, and they asked him a question, trying to make him look foolish." And we'll look at that question in just a minute. But I want to back up before we get there. Just remind us that in Luke 20, we have this showdown between Yeshua and the religious leaders. Conflict. And there's 3 questions that they were trying to trick him with. Luke only records 2 of them, and today we're going to look at the second of the 2 that he records. Last week we looked at the first question. That was the question of verse 22. Is it lawful for us to give tribute unto Caesar or no? Should we pay taxes? And we talked about that, and they were just trying to be sneaky. It says in verse 23 that they did it with craftiness. They took spies, and we saw those spies were the Herodians and the Pharisees. And it says in verse 20 that these spies were trying to take hold of his words. That's the wording it says. We said those words in the Greek, it's almost like a cat trying to pounce on the mouse, waiting for just the right time to pounce. And so we're looking, or they were looking, just Yeshua say just the wrong thing, just the word that we can catch you in and find you guilty. But were they successful? No, we see in verse 26, they wanted to take hold of his words. So verse 26 says they could not take hold of his words. And so it says they held their peace in verse 26. So today we're looking at the second question. Okay, the Herodians and the Pharisees, they could not catch him in his words. Here comes the Sadducees. Another trick question for Yeshua. Ultimately, what are these trick questions? What did we say last week? We said that the enemy hates the truth. These questions were an attack on the truth itself, or himself, we could say, since Yeshua is the truth. We see the enemy hates the truth, he attacks the truth, and he'll do it in any possible way. But the fact is, the truth will always remain. No matter how much it comes under attack. And today's text is just another example of that, as we'll see. So let's look at our text today. So we're looking at verses 27 to 40. And last week we learned about the Herodians. We don't read much about the Herodians, and now we read about the Sadducees this week. Also, Sadducees, not mentioned very often in scriptures. In fact, this is the only place where Luke uses the word Sadducees. So who were the Sadducees? The very name, Sadukim, is debatable where they even got their name from. Some people think it's from the priest Sadok, but it's not very clear. But what's more important is what type of people they were. They were more of a political group of people than the Pharisees. The Pharisees were more focused on religion, traditions. But the Sadducees were much more political, much more materialistic and secular. Which is interesting because they actually had control of the chief priests at the time of Yeshua. So the spiritual condition, the spiritual leadership of Israel at that time was held by more secular type of people. That tells you what condition they were in when Yeshua came to them. And they didn't really get along with the Pharisees. It wasn't just that they had disagreements, but they really did not get along well. They rejected a lot of what the Pharisees believed. They rejected a lot of the traditions of the Pharisees. And when it came to Yeshua, they didn't really hate him as much as the Pharisees in the beginning. Because in reality, if they're more secular, what conflict would they have with Yeshua? Their doctrine was so far from Yeshua, there was really nothing to conflict about. And they were reaching different people. Sadducees focused more on the rich, and more people in Jerusalem, and Yeshua was more reaching out to the poor up in the Galilee. It wasn't until towards the end of Yeshua's 3-year ministry where he claimed to be the Messiah, a political leader in the eyes of the Sadducees, that he became more of a threat to them. They had more of an issue with him once they realized he was presenting himself as a Messiah. They didn't want any more trouble with the Romans. They wanted the system they had in place. So they worked together. Pharisees and the Herodians worked together, and now Sadducees are joining them in trying to attack Yeshua. Again, this shows us just how much they hated Yeshua. Because all these groups of people hated each other. They hated Yeshua more than they hated each other. Like we said last week, enemy of my enemy is my friend. But their strategy in attacking Yeshua and attacking the truth was different than what we saw last week. Different than the Herodians. Because the Herodians, what were they trying to do? They were trying to portray Yeshua as a heretic against God
Они пытались говорить, что
or as a rebel against Rome.
он либо не
Remember, the question was about taxes. Should we pay taxes to Rome?
Они хотели, чтобы он
And they were trying to trick him. If he said yes or no, he was going to have a problem.
чтобы он признал либо то, либо другое, да? Помните?
If he said yes, you should pay taxes, he was going to upset the Jewish people that thought it was wrong to pay taxes to a pagan government. And if he said no, don't pay taxes, then he'd be in trouble with Rome. They would arrest him for being a rebel. And remember, their goal in verse 20 was simply to deliver him to the power and authority of the governor. They were trying to get him to Pontius Pilate. They wanted to get rid of him. They wanted Yeshua out of there. They wanted for Yeshua to be found guilty of a crime. But the Sadducees had a different approach. This question wasn't meant to get Yeshua arrested. Their question had a different goal. And that goal was to make Yeshua look foolish. Why? Why is that an effective approach? Well, if you can't get rid of Yeshua, and we see they're already having trouble getting rid of him, then the other thing you can do is make him look like a fool. Because if you make him look like a fool, and he's claiming to be the Messiah, how many people are going to continue following a fool? The logic is, if you can't take him away from the people, then take the people away from him. Understand that first they were trying to get him arrested so he'd just be physically gone and away from the people. But he says, well, if we can't get him away from the people, then let's have the people not want to follow him. Okay. So the logic is, if this is a great teacher of Israel, he can't answer this simple theological question by the Sadducees, then he'll lose all credibility. He'll no longer be a threat because no one will want to follow someone that can't answer the Sadducees' question. And so they asked him this trick question about the resurrection, which is a bit ironic because we already said the Sadducees were much more secular and materialistic. And here they are asking a very spiritual question about the resurrection. Because they didn't believe in a resurrection. That's what it says plainly in verse 27. Sadducees, which deny that there is any resurrection. They don't even believe in resurrection, and their trick question is about the resurrection. They didn't believe anything after death. They said they believed when you died, you were dead, ceased to exist. And plus, they didn't believe in resurrection because they only believed in the first 5 books of the Bible. They only believed in the Torah, not all the prophets, not all the writings. No. And so to them, in the first 5 books of the Bible, they could not see any mention of resurrection. So if Moses didn't write about it, then we don't believe it. And so they didn't believe in resurrection, but it wasn't enough just not to believe in it. They liked to ridicule people that did believe in it. We see the same ridicule of the resurrection with Paul. If you remember in the book of Acts chapter 17 with the Greeks, and he gave his sermon, and afterwards some just ridiculed him for talking about resurrection, rising from the dead. So they didn't believe in resurrection. We also see in Acts 23 verse 8, they didn't believe in angels either, or really anything spiritual. No angels, no spirits. So very secular thinking. Again, very different from the Pharisees. Pharisees did believe in all those things. Pharisees did believe in resurrection. They believed in angels. They believed in all those things. And so, before, the Pharisees and Sadducees would always have these discussions with each other. Debates. And the problem with the Pharisees, when it came to the resurrection, they had a lot of debates among themselves. Okay, we agree that there's going to be a resurrection, but what are we going to look like when we rise from the dead? Are we going to have the same clothes? What type of clothes are we going to have? Are we going to look the same way we do now? If someone was missing an arm when they died, are they going to rise from the dead without an arm? A lot of different things that were unclear for the Pharisees. And the Sadducees took advantage of this confusion. And so they would debate the Pharisees. And really, like we said before, they weren't looking to win the argument, not just to win the argument, but to make them look foolish. And they tried to do it with this one question. The same question that they asked Yeshua. Said, if it works on these Pharisees, let's try it out on Yeshua. Let's make him look like a fool, just like we always do with the Pharisees. And so they asked the question, what's the trick question? There was a woman. She was married to 7 different men. They all kept dying after each other. I'm not sure if it was her cooking or what caused such rapid death, but 7 men. No children. That's the problem. And so they're saying, afterwards, in the resurrection, whose wife will she be? That's the trick question in verse 33. It's not lawful for her to be married to all 7 men. So in the resurrection, who's she going to be? Whose wife will she be? And it's based on then the logic behind it. We don't really need to look into it, but Deuteronomy 25 verses 5 and 6 is the logic, is the Torah portion behind the question. It talks about the responsibility of a man to take up his brother's wife if the man dies, if his brother dies, and to have a child with her if she didn't have a child with him, so that his seed would continue. And that's the premise for all of the book of Ruth. So this is the Sadducees' thought. They wanted to trick him. They wanted to make him look like a fool with this trick question that always worked on the Pharisees. And ultimately, what they wanted to do, they wanted to ridicule Yeshua. You guys know what ridicule means? Ridicule means to laugh at, to mock, to make fun of. Specifically, they wanted to ridicule the resurrection. They didn't believe in the resurrection, but that wasn't enough. They wanted everyone else who did believe in the resurrection to appear foolish. They wanted to laugh at them. But what is ridicule? Ridicule is just another way to attack the truth. To attack the truth of God's word. There's many people today who ridicule the Bible. And they have a lot of things in common with the Sadducees. So before we get back to them, let's just look in general why people ridicule the truth, the Bible. Typically, people that ridicule the Bible had the same attitude towards the truth. These Sadducees ridiculed out of really hatred for the truth. Hatred, anger, hostility. This was the character, actually, of the Sadducees. Josephus, the Jewish historian, says the Sadducees were kind of rough people. Their behavior was rough. They weren't polished. They didn't have very good manners. So not only did they not believe in the resurrection, but they fought against it. And if you did believe in the resurrection, they were going to be pretty rough with you. We're going to have a mercy on you. This is really brought out in Acts chapter 4. Let's hold our place here, turn to Acts 4 real quick. Acts chapter 4.
Which verse?
Verses 1 to 3. Acts 4, 1 to 3. This is when the apostles were preaching about what? The resurrection. And who puts them in jail? The Sadducees. says, and as they spake unto the people, the priests and the captain of the temple and the Sadducees came upon them, being grieved that they taught the people and preached through Jesus the resurrection from the dead. What was their response? It wasn't just, okay, whatever, we disagree with you. It says they laid hands on them, put them in hold until the next day, for it was now eventide. It's not just that they disagreed with him, with what the apostles were preaching about the resurrection, but they hated it. They were hostile against it. They said, okay, it's not just that we disagree with you, but we're putting you in jail. They were very aggressive towards the resurrection. They were even ready to kill Lazarus. Lazarus already died once, rose from the dead, and they wanted to kill him again because he was living proof of the resurrection. How many times can you kill Lazarus? That was maybe a game of the New Testament. He died. They were trying to kill him again. That's brought out in John 10, verses 10 to 11. We won't turn there, but that's where it's found. So why such hatred for the truth? Why not just agree to disagree when someone has a different belief? Two reasons, I believe. Number one is if the truth conflicts with what you believe, it's different than what you believe, then it's basically calling what you believe, your belief, a lie. Okay? You understand? If you say that this is true and somebody believes something differently, by default it's saying that what you believe is a lie. And people don't want to be wrong. So they can be aggressive towards what you're saying as truth. And the second reason for such hatred against truth is because the truth often says something against you and how you view things. The truth can be very offensive in a personal way. And so people ridicule the truth when it conflicts with their own beliefs. They hate the truth and they ridicule it because it often requires them to admit something or be accountable to someone. I'll say this is happening especially in American culture, this rise of the homosexual movement. It's become a very aggressive movement in America. Now the latest thing in the news is Disney is trying to require every Disney movie, every product of Disney to have some mention of homosexuality, to normalize it for children. And when you speak out against stuff like that, you better expect a lot of hatred from them. Why? Why such anger against just what the Bible states? It's because it speaks against their lifestyle, the sinful pleasures that they love. They feel like what they're doing is right. If you come and say it's wrong, that's not something they want to hear. The problem is summarized in John chapter 3. Turn to John 3. John 3, verses 19 and 20. John 3, verses 19 and 20. And this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light. Why? Because their deeds were evil. For everyone that does evil hates the light, neither comes to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved. That's why they get so angry and end up ridiculing the Bible. Because they love their lifestyle. Not just homosexuality, all sin. They love their lifestyle, they love what they're doing, and they don't want to be told that it's wrong or sinful. They don't want what was verse 19 said, they don't want that their deeds will be reproved. No, verse 20. So these people end up not only not coming to the light, but they also fight against the light. They love darkness, and they don't want the light interfering with their sinful pleasures, exposing their sinful pleasures. Darkness simply characterizes the enemies of the truth. And the sad thing is that many people love the darkness rather than light, according to John 3:19. Again, why? Because what they're doing is evil. It says their deeds are evil. They would rather continue in their evil deeds, continue in darkness, rather than have the light expose their darkness because they don't want to quit what they're doing. So when we approach a sinner with the gospel, and you tell him about his sin and he needs to turn from his sin, be prepared for a response. It's either going to be a response of humility and repentance. It's less frequent. But more often, though, he's going to respond with some sort of pushback. Hatred towards the light is really what it is. And his counterattack may be one of ridicule. Because the goal of ridicule is to make you look like you're wrong, make you look like you're the foolish one. What you're saying about my sin is wrong. I can continue in my sin. You're the fool for thinking the way that you do. But ultimately, these people ridicule the truth because they don't want to be accountable to it. They don't want to stand before a God that will judge them for what they love to do. Their sins. And so many people who ridicule the truth, ridicule the gospel message, the resurrection, they do so out of hatred. Because they love darkness. They love to continue in their sin, free of God's judgment, while simultaneously hating the light. People ridicule out of hatred, but they also ridicule out of ignorance. Sadducees may have hated what Yeshua was doing, but they were also ignorant of the truth. In Matthew 22:29, it's the parallel account back in Luke 20. But in Matthew 22:29, it's recorded after the Sadducees gave their trick question. Yeshua said, "You do err, not knowing the scriptures nor the power of God." You do err means you're wrong. Literally in Greek, it means to wander in the wrong direction. Any of you ever been out in the woods and just kind of wander off and get lost? That's the idea behind this word. You think you're going the right direction, but you're really in the wrong direction. You made a mistake. You're lost and you don't know the right way. And so he says you're wrong. Not knowing the scriptures, two things of ignorance. You don't know the scriptures and you don't know the power of God. They didn't know the power of God, and that's their question itself shows that. Their question had a faulty basis. Wasn't a good premise for their question. They asked the question without a proper knowledge of the power of God. Their question shows they were limited in their understanding of the power of God. Because they only understood how things operate in this world. That's the phrase he uses in verse 34, this world. Jesus answering said unto them, verse 34, the children of this world marry and are given in marriage. They based their question on how things operate in this world. But they didn't understand the power of God, that he will change things, that things will operate differently in that world. That's the phrase he uses in verses 35 and 36. So we have this contrast between this world and that world. This world is the world we live in now. That world is the world that will be changed after our resurrection. And so he says in that world, in verses 35 and 36, but they which shall be accounted worthy to obtain that world and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage, neither can they die any more, for they are equal unto the angels, and are the children of God, being the children of the resurrection. They didn't understand how things would be in that world. Everything they did, their question was completely based on their understanding of this world. But the resurrection is going to change a lot of things. Physically, our bodies won't be the same. The way we live our lives won't be the same. Paul talks about this glorious transformation in 1 Corinthians 15. But basically, life in that world will be much different than how we live today in this world. And so in this world, the focus here of this question was about marriage. You know, in this world, we focus on marriage, families, raising up children. That's how we operate in this world. But the Sadducees were ignorant that it won't be that way in that world. They were ignorant of the power of God to change things in such a way. Because why do we get married? Why do we have children? It's because people die. And if we didn't produce more children, we would just all disappear. It's the practical reasoning behind marriage and children. So they were ignorant of the power of God, that things would work differently after the resurrection. Again, they were always focused on the materialistic side of things. And they couldn't believe in how things would be. So he says, you're ignorant of the scriptures. You do err not knowing the scriptures. But look at specifically how he responds to their ignorance and even their hatred. First, he explains to them their error. Doesn't just say you're wrong, but he explains why they're wrong and what is right. Explains how things in that world will be different than how things are in this world, especially regarding marriage. It says in that world, people aren't going to be married. They're going to be like angels in that respect. They don't marry and they don't need to reproduce. But he also addresses their greater issue of not believing in the resurrection at all. Because again, remember, they didn't even believe in the resurrection. You're ignorant not just of how things would operate in the resurrection, but you're ignorant in the fact that there is a resurrection itself. And so Yeshua uses what in verses 37 and 38? He quotes from the Torah. Remember, we said earlier that they only believed in the Torah. They said we couldn't find the resurrection in the Torah. So Yeshua says, you're ignorant. You don't know the scriptures. Let me show you where it is. And so he reads in verse 37 and 38. Now that the dead are raised, even Moses showed at the bush. He says, you guys don't believe in Moses? You don't think Moses talked about the resurrection? You're wrong. Moses showed at the bush when he called the Lord the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. For he's not a God of the dead, but of the living, for all live unto him. Sadducees tried to trick him about the resurrection. He said, no, you're wrong. Look to the Torah. And what he's quoting here is Exodus 3, verse 6. And basically what he said was the words, but I'll just read Exodus 3:6. He says, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. God here talking from the bush to Moses. And Moses hid his face, for he's afraid to look upon God. And the point he's making here is, that Yeshua is making here is, God said, I am the God of your fathers. Not I was the God of your fathers. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were all dead by the time Moses came along. But he said, I am still the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Meaning by necessity, there had to be some eternality to these men. They weren't dead and gone and disappeared. It shows that there has to be this concept of resurrection. Otherwise, he would have said, I was the God, they're gone now. Now I'm your God. Future I'll be other people's God. So no, I am the God of everybody who's believed in me for all time. Yeshua shows that God wasn't talking just about dead men, but men with eternal souls. Not just that, but actual resurrected body for the future. So he says again, you guys are wrong. You do err not knowing the scriptures. You ridicule others, try to make other people look foolish for them believing in the resurrection. But here's a proof from your own Torah that you say you believe in that says the resurrection is true. You ridicule others out of ignorance. You're ignorant of the fact that God is not a God of the dead, but of the living. You try to make them look foolish, and Yeshua turns it around with a proper interpretation of the scriptures. You do err not knowing the scriptures. Let me tell you what the scriptures actually say. That's the response to their ignorance and ridicule. And so we come to the end of the conversation in verses 39 and 40 back in Luke 20. It says, Then certain of the scribes answering said, Master, thou hast well said. And after that, they durst not ask him any question at all. We saw in verse 26, after Yeshua answered their question, the Herodians and Pharisees became silent. They didn't have anything else to say. They couldn't say anything. And now the Sadducees were put to silence. But Yeshua responded to their ridicule with the truth. Not only did he respond in truth, but he responded with love. Love. It's hard to imagine how Yeshua could love so many people that ridiculed him. Ridiculed and mocked him. He was thoroughly ridiculed his whole ministry. And he was ridiculed as he walked to the cross. He was ridiculed as he hung on the cross. Let's just remind ourselves of that. In Luke 22, he's ridiculed all the way to the cross, and yet he still loves these people. Luke 22, 63 to 65, let's just remind ourselves of the terrible mockery of our Savior, and yet his response to them. Luke 22, verses 63 to 65, And the men that held Jesus mocked him and smote him. And when they had blindfolded him, they struck him on the face and asked him, saying, Prophesy, who is it that smote you? And many other things blasphemously spake they against him. Such ridicule, such, like it says, blasphemy. Didn't stop there. They were having fun with him all the way to the cross, even on the cross. Luke 23, verses 35 to 37. And the people stood beholding, so Yeshua is here hanging on the cross. And the rulers also with them. Who do you think was in that crowd? Think maybe some of the Sadducees were there, some of the Pharisees. Those that had been ridiculing him just a few days earlier. They got rid of Yeshua. It wasn't enough for them. They had to go see him hang on the cross and ridicule him some more. Derided him, saying, He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ, if he is the Messiah, the chosen of God. Soldiers joined in. Soldiers mocked him, coming to him and offering him vinegar, and saying, If thou be the king of the Jews, save yourself. Ridicule all the way to his death. They learned nothing. They ridiculed out of hatred and ignorance of the truth. We should be prepared, first of all, for that same ridicule. Jude 18 tells us there will be mockers in the last time. And John 15:18 tells us, Yeshua spoke and he said, If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. It means that we are to be hated by association with him. They mocked and ridiculed Yeshua. Why should we be any different? We should expect the same if we're standing for the truth that he gave us. And yet, through all this ridicule, all this mockery, what is Yeshua's response as he hung on the cross? Still in Luke 23, verse 34. Father, forgive them. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. In Luke 20, we saw him silence them. But he wasn't trying just to win an argument. He wasn't trying to make them look foolish instead of himself. He wasn't just saying, I'm right and you're wrong. He responded in love. Because he wanted them to realize their error, to turn from it, and be saved. Remember, they erred not knowing the scriptures. They were lost. They were wandering in the woods in the wrong direction. He wanted them to be found. Wanted them to be saved. So it gave him no joy just to win an argument. It gave him joy to give his life for these sinners, for these that ridiculed and mocked him. He responded with truth and love. We need the same response. It's not easy. It's never easy. Somebody's making fun of you, saying you're dumb or stupid for believing in Yeshua or believing in a resurrection. How do we respond? Try to win an argument? Try to say, you're wrong, I'm right? No. Yeshua took much more ridicule than any of us will ever have in our lives. And he responded with love and truth. And some will respond. As he stood there and took that ridicule and gave the response, many of them still hated him. They said, whatever, you're still a fool. But what does it say in verse 39 of Luke 20? It says, certain of the scribes answering said, Master, thou hast well said. I think this was a sincere statement. I think there were some in that crowd who, in the beginning, had sided and believed the same thing as the Sadducees or the Pharisees. But by the end, as they saw Yeshua's response, they heard his words, they realized that he spoke truth. Remember in verse 21, back with the Herodians, they were giving this false flattery. They said, you teach the way of God truly, we respect you. It was all a lie. But I believe some in the crowd at the end realized that he did speak the truth, and they believed. There will always be some in the crowd, even among the people that ridicule us, that will end up believing and trusting in Yeshua. That is where our focus needs to be in the face of ridicule. Not on, you're really upsetting my flesh right now and I want to hit you or I want to respond in some negative way. But to say, Yeshua loves you, to realize that, and for us in turn to love that person. Speak the truth. Realize that they are erring, they're ignorant of the scriptures, they're ignorant of the very power of God, but that some, upon hearing the truth, will stop ridiculing and end up believing in the truth. We're not just trying to silence them or prove that we're right. Everything we do is with the response of Yeshua to draw them to salvation. Let's pray. Father,